Colleen, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Johnson, and I'm currently serving as the Deputy Executive Director for the tribe on an interim basis. My permanent position is Communications Director, but I've been in this interim role for about 6 months now. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you, Colleen, for inviting me, and thank you all for being on the line. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, let me do my share screen here before I get too far. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it in work mode.
Right, let's see. I'm just going to talk a little bit about my perspective on the sovereignty of the Umatilla tribe and how that influences our resource management capabilities and relationships with other organizations and governments, whether they be federal, state, local, intertribal, private corporations, non-governmental entities, and how we can use those relationships, hopefully, to influence the region in a positive way. So, the foundation that I'm sure has been talked about a lot through these webinars, and I've had a chance to watch a few of them and observe quite a bit of the presentations. But the Treaty of 1855, and I've included here a couple pictures, one of young Chief Joseph and on the right with his family, and then Lawyer on the left. So these are some relatives in the past of mine. Our family is descended from Lawyer and from Joseph's sister, so we have some of the Joseph band heritage in our blood. And one thing I like to mention when I'm presenting to outside organizations or largely non-Indian audiences is how skilled of negotiators our ancestors were, and how much forethought they had to be able to put us in the position that we're in today, or set the framework for us to be in this position today. And that might be changing now, but in the past there was kind of a perception or a stereotype that Indians didn't understand the negotiations and what was going on. And in my mind, I think of like the Manhattan being sold for a string of beads or something like that. And I really tried to dispel that any chance I get. And our people, I believe, from what I've read and what I understand, had a really good sense of the stakes of the negotiations, and knew what they were doing in those negotiations, even though there were obviously language barriers as well as some amount of duress involved in those negotiations. But one way that I think this is exemplified is in the treaty minutes, or the history of the Treaty Council at Walla Walla. The initial proposal from the United States negotiators, Isaac I. Stevens and Joel Palmer, was for basically all the mid-Columbia Plateau tribes and bands to be moved on to two reservations, either the Yakima Reservation or the Nez Perce Reservation. There was no proposal for the Umatilla Reservation in the first offer from the United States at that Treaty Council. So that was something that our ancestors were able to make happen. They basically said, if we don't get a home land base for us apart from those two reservations, then we won't settle. We won't agree to the treaty, and we'll likely just go to war. So there was a faction. There were people that were willing to fight to the death and just fight until the end to protect their lands and protect their right to be here. So I think that's a pretty strong example of how good of negotiators they were to be able to force the creation of the Umatilla Reservation, which today you can see some of the stats there. I think people are pretty familiar with those for the most part, who are likely to be on the line right now. But we did cede over 6.4 million acres and have a reservation today that's approximately 172,000 acres. So yeah, and another thing that's very important to emphasize, and it's I'm sure been a theme running through the webinars is that the tribes have inherent sovereignty. It's not something that was granted to the Indian people and the tribe by the United States. The treaty recognized the Umatilla Indian Reservation as our homeland and secured that for us, but the sovereignty, our right to use and access the resources that we always had was something that was inherent in the people and applies not just on the reservation or even in the ceded territory, but throughout all traditional use areas. One other thing, possibly Naomi will get into it more. I don't know if it's so critical now for the purposes of this, but there are some canons of construction that apply to treaty interpretation, and all of those canons have been validated at the Supreme Court level, and all favor resolving disputes or ambiguities in treaty language in favor of tribes. So here's the map of the traditional use area. Obviously, that's beyond the ceded territory of the reservation, going well throughout the western United States and along the West Coast. And this is some of the markers that are described in the Treaty of 1855 in Article 1 to identify the lands that were being ceded by the Umatilla, Cayuse, and Walla Walla people. And I think it's interesting just to think about how these were described and by people with imperfect knowledge on behalf of the United States who were not as nearly familiar with the area as the Indian people were, but these are some of the boundaries that made it into the treaty itself. There's a lack of clarity in some of those terms, and again, I would leave it to Naomi or other of our attorneys to go more into that detail if it were necessary, and probably isn't for the purposes of today, but the descriptions were not perfect, but they did result in this cession of land, which I should also note this was for purposes of the Indian Court of Claims in the 1950s that these boundaries were drawn and those treaty markers were interpreted. So that was strictly for certain purposes and not, there's still likely some room for conversation about where the actual boundaries of these lines should be, but this is the best line we have currently. I also just like to show some of the original treaty pages for those who might not have seen them, and I just never get tired of looking at historic photos or documents, and so I just wanted to share some of these pages. This is the first page of the treaty itself, and then this is a signature page with the names of the tribal signees, and then on the right there's sort of a stamp by Isaac Stevens notarizing those. So again, the treaty being the foundation for the relationship between the United States and the Umatilla tribe, confederated tribes. That relationship brought with it not only the creation of the reservation and the traditional use rights that go with it. It also resulted in the creation of the trust responsibility, and that's something that arose through the Supreme Court again, and their efforts to try and understand, what are these entities within the United States? What are these Indian tribes? How do we describe them? And at one point there was a term used, the domestic dependent nations, and it has been sort of a paternalistic viewpoint at times, where the federal government knows best, and the tribes, should follow suit with what the United States thinks is best. And at least since the 1970s, I suppose, with the creation of the Indian Self-Determination Act and some efforts to enable tribes to manage their own affairs. The trust responsibility has changed somewhat. Now it's largely looked at as a duty to consult with Indian tribes about issues or topics that affect Indian rights, interests, or resources. I would even go a step farther, and some tribes and their attorneys have gone farther and said that it's not just a duty to consult with tribes about certain issues, but there's actually an affirmative duty to protect tribal rights and interests, at least when that can be described or taken clearly enough from federal law or statute to determine what the duty is. So showed a couple pictures here, which actually go back farther than the treaty. This is from on the right, there's some examples of the Jefferson Peace Medals that Lewis and Clark carried with them, and then on the left is a picture here from our Public Affairs Office, where we have a replica of that medal in the office. So just wanted to share that as sort of a demonstration that our relationship with the United States actually goes back even farther than the Treaty of 1855, goes all the way back to Lewis and Clark, although the real formal relationship began with the treaty. So we have that trust relationship with the United States. We have, so many federal agencies that we work with, from numerous agencies within the Department of Interior, including Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's relationships with the Forest Service, Indian Health Service, Department of Energy. There's all kinds of federal agencies with which we do business and do what we can to make sure we have a strong influence or voice on issues that affect our resources or lands. Shifting from the federal level into the state level, we also have a government-to-government relationship with the state of Oregon as well as the state of Washington. These relationships, are obviously a little different. They're not the states individually were not parties to the treaty. It's in the United States. That's a constitutional level agreement. Treaties are the supreme law of the land and the Constitution. So states do have a role, though. Obviously, we're within the state of Oregon here, and some of our ceded territories within the state of Washington. So there are issues within both states that have a lot of impact potentially on our rights and resource interests. So we do meet quarterly with the state of Oregon on a government-to-government basis, and are able to talk about any current issues that we might have, from gaming to education to healthcare, criminal justice, whatever it may be. Whatever we need to talk about, we can use that as a forum on a quarterly basis. There's also the Legislative Commission on Indian Services through the Oregon legislature, and that is a group that provides a forum for discussion of a range of issues. A lot of those same things I mentioned are issues and topics that are discussed within the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, LCIS. We also have relationships with county and local municipalities. So we have a number of MOUs, in fact, in the Tri-Cities area with City of Kennewick, City of Richland, I believe, Port of Kennewick. We have just a whole series of MOUs throughout Oregon and Washington that enable us to have a more formalized relationship with some of those smaller subunits of the state government, and give us some structure to work through potential issues with those kind of government entities. Switching to the intertribal level, we also, we participate in a number of intertribal organizations that also have an effect and ability to protect some of our rights and enhance them where they can. So the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission is the first one that comes to mind, and I had the privilege of working there for about 5 years while I was in law school, or before I was in law school, and during, and saw some of the great work that they're able to do representing the Yakama Nation, the Warm Springs and Nez Perce and the Umatilla tribes. So really important work that they're doing on an intertribal level. HNRTC, that stands for the Hanford Natural Resource Trustee Council. It is an organization or an entity that is made up of not just tribes, but also the state of Oregon and the state of Washington, as well as the Department of Energy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and NOAA Fisheries. And that group is undertaking an assessment of the injury to natural resources that has occurred due to the release of contamination from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. So I believe we had Althea Hustes Wolf present on that, as well as Mason Murphy might have touched on that. So something that some of you I know are familiar with, and I'm sure have heard of. So that's one forum we have. Also, I should mention the tribes involved with that are the Yakama Nation, Umatilla, and Nez Perce. For the Portland Harbor Natural Resource Trustee Council, that's a similar sort of entity that was formed under authority of the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, sometimes known as Superfund. It's looking at contamination from releases that occurred in the lower Willamette River, primarily in the early half of the 20th century through World War II. There was a lot of boat building activities, and there's still a lot of industrial operation in the area, though the release of contamination is not as expensive as it used to be. So for the Portland Harbor Natural Resource Trustee Council, along with Umatilla, there are 4 other tribes involved, and that includes Warm Springs, Nez Perce, Siletz, and Grand Ronde. We're also involved in a number of intertribal forums at Willamette Falls, Warm Springs again, Yakama Nation, Siletz, Grand Ronde all participate, and there's a strong interest that a lot of our fishermen have, fisherwomen and men have, in taking eels or lamprey from that area. So that's the last harvestable area to get lamprey throughout the Columbia Basin. Although we are undertaking some restoration efforts, I know, in the Umatilla and other subbasins. ATNI, that's affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, and they handle a lot of different issues. Intertribal Buffalo Council, National Congress of American Indians, obviously a national level organization that has, I believe, hundreds of tribes engaged in it. So these are just a sampling of some of the things we're involved with on an intertribal level. I should also mention none of these lists that I'm showing or providing are exclusive. There's, these are just a sampling of some of the things that I'm more familiar with, and there's definitely a lot more to our activities than just what I'm showing. So one thing that I've heard Carl Sheeler say, and I want to point out now, but just from our intertribal resource management, we have management authority all the way from buffalo to sea lions. So think about the expansive nature of our co-management and resource management authorities, and it covers quite a geographic and biological range. So here's a sampling of some of our relationships that we have with non-governmental or corporate entities. There's obviously a railroad running right through the reservation with the right of way for that, and so we have a formal relationship with Union Pacific Railroad, and some of you might have seen in the latest edition of the CUJ that Union Pacific actually awarded Yellowhawk $25,000 just last week, I believe, for Yellowhawk's efforts to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. So getting some good recognition there, and I can't say for sure, but I would think that we for Umatilla probably have one of the stronger relationships with Union Pacific or with railroads that exist among Indian tribes. We also have a relationship with Amazon, and they just recently were able to get our Umatilla Dictionary online, so that's available now, and hopefully people are aware of that and can access that as they'd like to. Energy Trust of Oregon, I know there was a presentation through the CAP webinars from some of their representatives and talking about some of the work they can do to help encourage and promote sustainable alternative sources of energy. Also, on the academic side, there's a number of colleges that we have relationships with, and I also saw the presentation from Sidell Harrison at Oregon State. I know she's she's a tribal member and has a relationship with the tribe. So even if there's not formalized relationships in all these cases, there's personal relationships and connections and programs that have served to benefit tribal members and also have increased diversity and inclusivity on the academic side as well. We do have a formal relationship with Whitman College. We have an MOU with them. We actually have employees at the Walla Walla Community College. We have our lab there, and Alexa Main is one of the staff there doing some really great cutting edge research on lamprey and mussels. We also have a student at Blue Mountain Community College who is currently serving as the student body president for Blue Mountain. That's Megan Van Pelt, and she's also an intern for the CUJ. So just a lot of great relationships, a lot of places we can build and hopefully continue to collaborate. Washington State University has actually offered to provide assistance if needed with our distribution of COVID-19, of the Pfizer vaccine for COVID. So we haven't had to take them up on it yet, but that is something that we could do. And Washington State University Tri-Cities is just right there in our backyard in Osheta territory. So this is just showing again, not a complete list, but just some of the logos for tribal businesses and entities that we have, and ways that we're able to influence the region. Obviously, Wild Horse is a huge economic driver in Umatilla County and one of the biggest, if not the biggest, employer in the region. So, or at least in Umatilla County. Again, Yellowhawk is being recognized all over the place for their response to COVID-19 and their ability to adapt and transition to doing the testing and vaccine administration that they've been doing for over 6 months now. Coyote Business Park is doing a great job attracting interest and working to increase the amount of economic diversity on the reservation. So trying to bring people and bring businesses onto the reservation. And it's just I like their logo a lot because it gives that sense of where we are at within the larger Northwest and kind of being that equidistant point between Portland and Spokane and Boise. It's a really good location from that perspective. We also again have the CUJ, which is able to transmit information and stories about the tribe, really with the internet, that could be anywhere in the world, but we also provide print copies that go quite a ways away and to tribal members throughout the United States that want those, or anyone else. Cayuse Holdings, now this is an outdated logo, but Cayuse Holdings is a number of companies and is really diversifying and bringing in or adding a lot more business for the tribe throughout the United States and the world, and they're doing all kinds of things for the federal government and the military, and providing a lot of data management and support services. And Temustelik is really an incredible museum with really, I think, a unique perspective on from its ability to present the tribal viewpoint, and from a firsthand or us telling our own story to again being a unique spot in the Oregon Trail, and really, if I'm not mistaken, the only tribally operated museum on the Oregon Trail. So, yeah, this is showing a lot of private industry that the tribe is encouraging and facilitating. Also, some of our internal things like healthcare and media. But we can use all of these things, I think, to not just increase our influence, but to also make people aware of what it is that we're capable of and what we've been able to accomplish already to this point. So yeah, this is the end of my presentation, and yeah, just to kind of summarize, I mean, to me, it's pretty clear, and I went through that all pretty quick and at a very high level, but it's pretty obvious that there's been a number of ways that the tribe has influenced the region. Obviously, we had sole occupancy and proprietorship at one point, so we were the influence on the region. And thinking back to the presentation, I don't know if it was Andrew Adesi or someone with one of the forest or wildlife programs, showing some of the pictures. Oh, Lindsay Chiano, I believe, as well, showing pictures of early shots of the forest from like the 1930s and just the way those were managed. So, it's clear we had, as Indian people, a strong influence on the land, predating contact with European people and society. We have chances to influence education at the state level. We're obviously setting a really good example through COVID-19 again, and our ability to protect the community and provide a very cautious, safe approach while also being able to keep our economy running. Through science, mentioned the water and environmental lab. I didn't mention our lab at the domes and the analytical toxics work that we're able to do there, and hopefully apply at Hanford and other places. Art, sports, entertainment, you name it. I think we've got a chance to continue to have a really huge influence throughout the region. And if anybody watched the Top Chef episode last night, that was another good example of that, I think, and just how broad of an impact we can have. So there's a lot of opportunities awaiting us in the future. With opportunities, there's always challenges and things you have to overcome. But I think if we continue on the path we're on, and the work that's going on through this project is, a really big part of that. Climate change really running through and under everything that we're talking about, and it's going to have an effect on every aspect of our lives. So we'll have to see what those opportunities and challenges actually look like. But I think we've gotten a pretty good sense of that, or at least as good as we can through this series of webinars. And the main thing is that we'll want to continue to have our resources in place so that we can access them and use them and exercise that management or co-management authority. So I will just leave it at that and say thank you again all for your attention, and for anyone who might watch in the future online, thank you as well. And there's my contact information, and would welcome any correspondence that anyone would like to have on anything related to this or anything else. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was awesome. I know that when